Today we're going to build a small puzzle game using React and TypeScript. I don't know whether this puzzle has an official name or not, so I'll be using something I came up on my own, which is going to be on-off. So by the end of this video, we should have something looking like this. The game is played out on a 4x4 grid, where each cell can be in one of two states. It can either be turned on, which is represented by greenish color, or it can be turned off, which is represented by red color. The goal of the game is to toggle the whole board to green. The only interaction with the board by the player is pretty much you can select any cell that you like and you can toggle it, but alongside that cell, all other cells on the same row and on the same column are going to be toggled as well. As I said before, by the end of this video, we will have a fully functional puzzle game, and in the next episode, we will try to build a solver for this puzzle, which is going to be able to tell us the optimal solution path and the minimal amount of moves that you need to solve it. And then we will be able to compare how many moves the player did versus the optimal path. For today's project, I created a small cheat sheet, which is a list of colors that I'm going to be using so that we don't spend too much time nitpicking the colors for our game board. Now that everything's clear about the project, let's proceed as usual by creating a new repository. We'll name the game on-off puzzle. It will have some empty readme, no git ignore today. Once the repository is created, we can then clone it. We can then jump into the created directory and we can bootstrap our project using yarn and Vite. We can do this by running command yarn create Vite current directory. It tells us that, hey, there are files. We can say, please ignore. Let's use React. Let's use TypeScript. Install all dependencies. And once that is finished, we can then clean things up a bit and then start our development server. So first of all, we don't need anything in public. We can jump into source folder. We can remove all the assets. We can edit index, probably delete everything like that. Let's drop this and look up our first color, which is going to be global background color. Next, let's also see what app CSS does. We don't need any of these. We will use 450 pixels for our GameField. And we can look at app. It does a lot of things which we don't really need. We can drop all of these bad boys. And let's see how it works if we run yarn dev. Alright, so this is a stripped down bootstrapped version of Vite plus React. The counter is working just fine. So let's clean it up as well, because we won't need that. Don't need app state, so pretty much app. Let's run our development environment in this tmux panel, jump into another one, and start working on our game puzzle. First of all, we will create 3 different components named GameHeader, GameInfo, and GameField. Next, we need to create those components: GameField, GameHeader, and GameInfo. Let's open any of them. GameInfo, it's going to be functional component, which doesn't have any props. It's going to return some div, GameInfo. Next, we can copy this thing to our GameHeader and copy it as well to our GameField. We can jump in back to our app and import those components. And to the left we see that everything works as it should. Now, before we start working on our components, we can actually implement a lot of things related to our game. Let's start with some game.ts, which will include some information about game state, what actions we can do, and maybe more in the future. So first of all, we need the game state. So the state is going to be a 2D grid of booleans, where each cell is represented by either true or false. It's either turned on or off. Then we will have a counter of how many moves the player has made. And we will have some flag saying whether the puzzle is solved or not. We can also describe the actions that we're going to be using. We will have an action new game, so we can start a new game whenever we want, and we can have an action of toggle cell, which needs to know the row and column we're dealing with. All right. Now we are going to be providing all game related information, including game state, using React context. So that's the next thing that we're going to create, game context. First of all, we need to define game context type, which says that, okay, the context is going to provide the state, which is going to be game state, and it will provide 2 helper methods. New game, so it's going to be a function that is going to reset everything in the puzzle, its state, to a new game representation, and it will have a toggle cell function, which, given a row and column, will toggle the cells. So we can create our context, create context using game context type or null, initialize it as empty, and let's see, we are going to export game provider, which is a simple functional component with game provider props. Game provider props is actually an interface, because we need to wrap other React nodes using our game provider. I think, yeah, like this. So it will take children, and what will it do? Game provider. It will return game context provider with some value. We're going to be wrapping some children and close it down, and value is going to be some value, where value use of type game context type, state new game, and toggle cell. Now we need to define these three things. First of all, our state. We're going to be using the useReducer hook to keep everything in one place. We will have a reducer, probably back in the game.ts file, which is going to receive current state, an action, and produce a new state based on that action. So what we can do is define state and dispatch useReducer. It takes what GameReducer and initial state. Both of these things are not defined yet, so let's go and define them. We have game state, so we can say that, hey, initial game state of type game state is going to be what? Grid. We need to initialize grid somewhat randomly. Initialize grid. Moves count is going to be 0, as it is a new game and has 1 false. Let's see. Initialize grid is a helper function which needs to create a grid with random booleans. So let's first define that our grid size is going to be 4. So our grid is 4 by 4, and then we can return an array. Given this grid size, we fill it with nulls, we map it. Don't really care about the null. Another array inside of it, also of grid size, null, and we can then map it. Again, we don't care. And now, once we are inside a grid cell, we need to provide a random value, random boolean, and we can achieve that by using math random, which is from 0 to 1, less than 0.5. This looks good to me. We can export it just in case. Alright, and next we need to provide GameReducer, which is going to be a function which takes current game state, it takes game action, and returns new game state. So we can switch on action type, case new game, somewhere mistake was made, GameReducer is actually equals. So in case of new game, we have to return new state, where state is again initialize grid, so some new random grid, moves count is 0, has 1 false. And this is actually grid. And in case of toggle cell, first of all, we don't want to allow the player to toggle cell if we have already won the game. So if the flag is already set, we return current state, nothing changes. Otherwise, we return something. So grid is going to be new grid, moves count is going to be new moves count, and as 1 is going to be some flag calculated. Let's see. New grid is going to be toggle cell, given current grid, given action row and action column. New moves count is going to be state moves count plus 1, has 1. So new grid will be action of type grid for boolean has 1. How do we check whether the game is finished, whether the puzzle is finished or not? Pretty much we need to check that all cells are set to true, and we can do that by saying new grid every for every row every cell must be true. So the only thing that's left is this toggle cell function. It takes grid, it takes row, it takes column, and it returns new grid. First of all, we need to clone the existing grid. We have structured clone for that. We are going to return the new grid. And now we need to actually toggle all the cells where the row or column are the ones that the user picked. This can be set using 2 for loops. So row from 0 up to grid size, column from 0 to grid size, if row column, then new grid, and this values is actually new grid. So we're simply toggling by setting the negated value. This is pretty much it for our game. Let's get back to game context. We can now update our imports. Initial, was it game state maybe? Yeah, initial game state. So we have state, which is game state, and dispatch. So the state we already have. Next we need to define new game, which is a helper function, simply saying that, hey, dispatch me an event of type new game. And toggle cell, given some row and column, we're simply saying dispatch type toggle cell with row and column. So these helper functions can be then used somewhere down the line in our components without the need to have dispatch exposed. Alright, game context. This is an error for fast refresh. We don't really care about that. Alright, seems like game context is defined, game provider defined. So let's go to our app or even main, and we need to wrap our app with game provider. And now all the components inside the app and even the app itself can use the context and its values. So one thing that we might actually add is a simple hook, useGame, that is going to tell us that, hey, context, use context, game context. If it's not there, we can throw a new error saying that use game must be used within game provider, and we can return context. Now this hook can be used to simplify the access to our context. Let's start with GameField, as it's like the most interesting component, most likely, which represents the game board, the grid itself. Alright, so first of all, let's see how we can use our newly created useGame hook here. state is actually useGame, right? And we can see that it's a game state. We don't really need the full state. We can simply say that, hey, I'm interested only in grid. And now we can try and render the grid. How do we do that? We say that, hey, this is going to be game container. And inside it, we are gonna iterate over grid rows, probably first. So map, we have row with row index, which says, hey, I'm gonna return some component. It's gonna be div with class name, something like game row. And inside each game row, we can say that, hey, please row map each cell and its index. We're going to return another component, which is going to be game cell. And we can probably close it. Now, first of all, we need to define different keys. So it's going to be game row and use row index. For game cell, we need to define a key which is based on both row index and cell index. Okay. And next we need to use the cell value. So probably we'll do it this way, that the class name is game cell, and if cell is set, then it's going to be green cell, otherwise it's going to be red cell. Alright, so if we look at our inspector, we can see that we have 4 rows, and each row has 4 cells, and they have different class names, green, red applied. But we don't see anything, and to fix that we need to apply some CSS. So let's import, this is GameField CSS. We first need to create that file. And let's see. Alright, so first of all, there was game container. I think, yeah, I'll use the predefined background color. It still has nothing to show. Then we will have game row, which is a class. Inside of it there is game cell, which we can tell that, hey, let me be width and height. That's a lot. All right, probably because, yeah, we have each cell on its row, and we don't want that. We need to make some grid. All right, so let's first say that our container is going to be flex with some flex direction column. So each row, the first row is going to be here, the second row here, and so on. And game row is also going to be flex. Flex direction is row. And now, like if we put border back, just to see, yeah, we have 4 cells. All right, so Let's define red cell. Let's define green cell. And simply use the backgrounds that I prepared for green. And for red. So this represents our game field, but we need some separators here. First of all, game container. Let's add some padding on all sides. Then each row will have some margin bottom. So, but we don't need the margin button for the last one, so we can say the last child margin bottom is 0. For each game cell, we can say that margin right is 12, but we don't need that. So for the last child, we can say that margin right is actually 0. Nice. Next, we can have some border radius applied, and probably to cell as well. Now, if we refresh this page, the game state changes, which is nice, but there is no interaction yet. What can we do to start the interaction? This is GameField, and pretty much to add our interaction, we say that, hey, on click, we need to toggle cell with our row index and cell index. Where do we get toggle cell from? We get it from our useGame hook. Let's see. Nice. As you can see, when I click on the cell, the state changes, but there is like no animation. It happens instantaneously, and that is something we would like to fix. So let's get back to GameField CSS. First of all, game cell, we can say that, hey, cursor is going to be a pointer, saying that there is some interaction possible for each game cell. Next, we need to somehow make this toggling a bit more user-friendly, so to speak, to show some sort of animation. What we can do is probably use some CSS rotate Y, something like transform. Let's see if we add transform rotate Y 180 degrees, and then we need to add some transition on game cell. So transform 2 seconds. Let's see what it does. All right. As you can see, now whenever we click, we have 2 seconds of this animation. One thing that we need to probably fix right away is that whenever I click on the cell, all the colors change instantaneously, and then the flipping happens. What we can do is we can say that, hey, background is also 2 seconds. Now you can see that it goes from red to green also in a slow rate. And we don't actually need to wait for full 2 seconds. We can wait only half a second. Let's see how it looks like. And I believe it looks so much better than before. Now, one thing that we need to achieve is we need to somehow win the game, right? So here I'm winning the game, the game field is green, and now whenever I click, nothing really happens. So we need to somehow show or indicate to the user that the game has been won, and we will have a new game button somewhere in the GameInfo section so that new game can be started. For now, let's work on this overlay that's going to be shown over the board. So if we go back to GameField and we say that, hey, we can grab the has won flag and say that if there is a has won, then we can say win overlay, you won, and currently it's shown below all the cells. That's where we put it into the game container. So let's see what we can do with that. First of all, we can define position as relative. Then it was, I think, win overlay. We can say position absolute, left 0, top 0, its width 100%, 800%. Its background is going to be RGBA this time, so it's going to be white, but fully transparent. And we can say that, hey, let's display some flex, line items center, justify content center. So the U1 is in the middle. Font weight is going to be bold. Let's put some font size, something like this. Now we would like to have a background that's animated. So we can say that, hey, like keyframes win animation. We are gonna animate things to a background which is 80% opaque, and we need to say that animation win animation 1 second, but it doesn't work. We need to say forwards. Or is it? Let's see, CSS, keyframes, transform, now we have background. How do we use the keyframes? CSS animation. So animation. Alright, the problem is probably not with anything, it's just keyframes needs to be defined outside. Yeah, and now it's picked up, and pretty much whenever we win, our overlay is above the grid. We can select the U1. I think we can avoid that pointer events. I think something like that. None. We can say that hey, win overlay pointer events none. Yeah. Then we cannot select the text. Then pretty much the pointer currently interacts with the grid, but the grid doesn't allow to change state, which is nice. So if we refresh, let's try to solve it again. And looks pretty nice. So the main game logic is implemented, so we can jump into GameHeader and GameInfo. Let's start with GameInfo component. In GameInfo, this is going to be ID, GameInfo. What are we going to show here? We're going to show pretty much a div with some text, some puzzle rules, so to speak, and there is going to be a button, new game, inside our div we have something like h2 saying let's see, like what the screenshot told us. Solve puzzle in fewest moves possible, and let's have some paragraph saying that hey, toggle grid cells and make them all green. Make them all green. Alright, so it's currently shows everything on the line of its own, so we need to apply some CSS here as well. We will import GameInfo CSS. We need to create that file, and we have GameInfo. Let's give this div some ID, probably. Let's call it subtitle, something. Subtitle. Alright, first of all, GameInfo is going to display this flex. Flex direction is row. We want our div and the new game next to it, like that. Next we need to adjust some sizings on h2 probably. Font weight bold, font size, line height, something like this. Then for our paragraph we can also say that padding margin 0. For paragraph also padding and margin 0. Probably can increase line height to 1.5. And our subtitle is gonna be flex grow, so it will take everything, all the available space. And now the new game, it's a button. I think I have a button background. It won't have any border, it will have some border radius, something like that. We can add some padding probably. We can set the color. We can also say font weight bold, font size. Yeah, looking good. So there is a button. Well, it does nothing when we click it. So first I need to add some space between GameInfo and our game field. So like margin bottom, something like that. Yeah. Next button, if I hover it, I will change some background. Right, so if I hover, the background changes, and I think when I click it, so when it's active, I want to transform it, probably do some scale. Let's see. Yeah, when I click it, it scales a bit down, which is nice. Now we would like our new game to actually reset the board to the new game. Let's see how we can do that. So it has an on click. We can say new game. Where do we take new game from? We use our game hook, use game hook. And that's pretty much it, right? Clicking new game, the board is regenerated, the moves count is reset, and we will show the moves count in the game header. So let's do that. Game header, our final component. It will show us what? First of all, ID, game header. It will show us some name, it will be wrapped in a div, and it will have two other divs, let's say like moves and best. Again, we need to apply some styling. GameHeader CSS is created. We can import it here. And let's see what we can do. As usual, we want to display flex. Say flex direction is row. Enough moves best. Our ID is going to be game title. We can say that, hey, please. Game header, game title. Somehow it doesn't want to take all the space that we gave it. Why doesn't it? No, it wasn't saved. All right. So let's see. Game title. H1. Let's see. Let's say something like this. Font size huge. Margin 0. Padding 0. Maybe something like line height, something like this. Again, our game header needs some margin bottom, 15, so that it is different from, or there is a space between game header and game info. Then some color of game header. Should be something like this. All right, and next we need to simply have these two boxes. So it will be class name counter. Same here. These two divs will be pretty much the same, except one will count the number of moves by player, and the other one will show the minimal amount of moves, which we will implement in the next episode. For now, we simply need to tell that, hey, it will be two divs, one of them saying like moves, and then it will have some value. Same here, div request and some value. So this is going to be class name counter title, and this is going to be class name counter value. Let's repeat counter title and counter value. And now we need to style it a bit. So GameHeader counter. Each counter can have counter title and counter value. Let's see, do I have anything for counters? Yeah. Background. All right. We need some spacing. So margin right, probably something like 6. It should be enough. Except that last child doesn't need any margin on the right. Then probably some min width. That's too much. 50, 60, 50. All right, looks good. Maybe padding 0.5. Counter display flex. Flex direction is a column. So line items center, justify content center. Okay. Title should have its own color. Probably bold. And then I think the counter value, something like weight, font size. Oops. All right. So what we can put here is moves count, which also comes from our useGame hook. Yeah, I think we can do something maybe 20 to show it a bit more bigger. I think maybe we can do something like that. Title. All right. So if we start playing, the moves count gets updated, and if we click the new game, the moves counter gets reset, which is exactly like we wanted. Now the only thing is like this on-off isn't really good looking, so to speak. And I think we can fix that by using Google Font Fira code. Use get font, get something embedded. We can open up our index.html, add some things that Google told us to. We can drop the icon. We can change the title to something like this. And game header, our title h1 is to use font family Fira code. Nice. So this is pretty much it. We have our game, which we can now play and solve. Yeah, it takes like 17 moves. So next time we will try to implement a solver for this puzzle, update our best counter, and maybe allow the users to show them or highlight the next best move based on what our solver suggests. So if you liked this project, please do like this video, subscribe to my channel so that you get notified about future content. Thank you very much. I'll see you again.